you want to understand why I left the place I was at, you're really gonna just have to hear the whole entire story. You won't believe it, of course, but your skepticism means nothing to me. Because what I saw that night on the bayou has been with me ever since. In my mind, in my thoughts, sometimes even in my dreams. It exists as a disturbing memory that I cannot shake away. That will never go away. Just as long as I live. It will be one of those things so terrifying that it will still just be as keen on my mind on my deathbed as it was the day it occurred. But whether or not you believe me, I'll tell it to you anyway. If not only to serve as a warning, a plea for caution, if you ever find yourself near the swamps late at night. At the time, I was working at a crappy little fast food place. The only thing worse than working at a crappy fast food place was working at a crappy fast food place at night. By yourself, without a vehicle. Especially when you just happen to live in the heart of rural Louisiana. Such was my case some years ago, the night this event happened to me. During this time, I lived quite a few miles away from the restaurant I worked at. And due to my lack of a vehicle or any access to a public bus system, I was dependent on others for my transportation to and from work. One night, after a busy evening of serving customers, I closed the store and locked up the restaurant. When I phoned my ride, nobody answered. Now, I'm not here to throw a pity party, but I can't help but to express anger at the fact that the person who drove me to and from work was my roommate, who had a car and no job. And I was basically the only person in our house who paid for rent at this time. And this loser, who had the carelessness to fall asleep, leaving me with no option but to walk again. This was not the first time that this has happened. The first time, it took me an hour and a half to get home, walking briskly. And to those of you who have never been in the rural regions of Louisiana, you have no clue. Here we have what's called a bayou. It's basically a swamp. Thick, murky, moist, frog-laden, mosquito-swarming, gator-infested, crappy-smelling swamp. With thick, tall grass, cattails, cypress trees, and heaves of pond scum. And I just so happen to live on the bayou. All the way down a long dirt road with hardly any streetlights, and a thick swamp on both sides of the road. There are no side roads, and the houses down this street are separated sometimes by more than a quarter mile. It's not merely spooky walking down this road at night, it's downright terrifying. You hear sounds, both real and imagined, coming from the bayou, chirping, croaking, howling, grunting animals. The rustling of leaves and branches in the canopy of the cypress trees, and the splashing of water from underneath them. That's the worst. You can hear the sound of something lurking nearby abruptly dunk under the water. It can be a turtle, a snake, or an alligator. You never know. You just keep walking, with your teeth and your hands clenched tight, hoping nothing crawls through the tall grass next to you and onto the road. Or even worse than subtle dunking sounds, the sudden splash that happen when you're walking and scare a toad or a frog and it jumps into the water. The sound almost makes you crap yourself as you begin a running spree that lasts for about 3 seconds before you realize what it was. And then you're just left with your heart pounding so hard that the sound of your blood gushing into your temples scares you just as much. These are the types of things that happen when you're in the bayou. This is what I had to look forward to that night, as my idiot roommate slept sprawled out on the sofa, with the television set probably still on, turned to reruns of the Three Stooges and the Marx Brothers. And don't get the impression that I simply called once and gave up. You can trust that his cell had around 7 or so missed calls, 3 very unfriendly voicemails, and several aggressive text messages. I could just imagine his phone laying in the other room of the house, softly vibrating in my desperate attempts to reach him as he snored. But eventually I gave up. And having just about no other friends to contact in the area as recourse, I stopped by the nearby gas station, grabbed an energy drink, and began my walk home. Now you must understand, the first 30 or so minutes of the walk isn't that bad. I'm still in the most populated part of town, and there are streetlights, stores, houses, and cars passing by in large numbers. That's important. If there are a lot of cars going by, you feel safer than when there are very few cars going by. Because when there are only 1 or 2 cars that pass you every 3 minutes, that means there could be a psychopath in one of those cars, and they may have enough time to stop by and murder you without being caught. But if there are a lot of cars around, there may be psychopaths passing by, but they're not likely to stop and kill you because there are far too many people around to witness the crime. At least, that's my reasoning. I digress. No psychopaths pulled up next to me as I walked about this part of town. Next, there comes a time in my journey where I have to turn down several suburban neighborhoods and walk down some streets to get to where I'm going. And here's where things get a little less safe, and I have to be a little bit more cautious. There's a lot less traffic down these roads, and you never know when some punk or gang might be hanging out in some empty lot or house, who might mess with you and try to pick a fight or mug you just to take an empty bottle of malt liquor and bash your skull in. You know, as an initiation ritual or something. These are the thoughts that go through my head as I walk through this region, and they keep me on my toes, until I reach the point to where the houses become fewer and fewer and the bayou begins. This is where the dirt road leading to my home is, and that's where I found myself this night, on foot. I look down the narrow road and can only see so far before it fades into misty darkness. I resented that, as I would have to spend the next hour walking its distance until I reached home. But anger took hold of my fear when I thought about all of this could have been spared if not for the neglect and carelessness of my roommate. When I got home, believe me, I was really going to have it in for him. I truly considered at that time the possibility of physically smacking his face. And with this thought in mind, I launched defiantly down the road. And the further I walked, the darker it became until no light shined but the stars and silver of the moon above me. Very soon the sound of any vehicle was completely non-existent. There was just me, the road and the bayou, and whatever creatures dwelt there. I heard the crickets chirp and the frogs croak and the occasional bird coo. To avoid fear, I focused on their chorus and let their sounds preoccupy my mind. I walked watching my shoes press into the sandy dirt as I placed one foot in front of the other. I would count my steps until I reached 100, and then I'd begin again. I tried to lose myself in repetition. My shoes became damper and damper, and I felt the soles of my feet become moist. I stopped counting to ponder whether I would smack my roommate with a wet sock. My thought was interrupted when I glanced up for a moment, and I saw that I was not on this road alone. A sharp panic seized my heart, and I became very nervous. A long distance up ahead of me, I could discern the soft silhouette of a figure. It was so far away that I couldn't tell whether it was moving ahead or in my direction. I froze, and I could feel the blood gushing into my temples. What were the chances of there being some malicious punk wandering the streets at night, looking to rob me or pick a fight? This was the reassuring thought that I had tried to convince myself that I was safe. I tried to keep calm, to not let my nerves get the best of me. I mean, whoever this was probably was just as frightened of the prospects of me as I was of them. If they had already detected me, that is. I didn't know what to do. Run? There were only 2 directions. Continue walking? What were the risks? As I stood there, I saw that the figure was indeed moving in my direction, that its form was becoming more defined. And this was the time I began to notice how awkwardly it was moving. The figure didn't walk normal. It didn't bob up and down like a normal person looks like when they walk. What was coming towards me, it would seem from my perspective, moved in short, quick, jerky movements. And I could see from what light was presented, how its twitchy limbs projected from its torso. and how it was getting closer. And how its head stuck out from a neck that was longer than any human neck should be. And how at this time, I could faintly hear the noises that it seemed to make. The sound of suckling. And how it was moving quicker. And how its face lifted. And I could see its eyes glare like glowing yellow beads. And how these wide, beady eyes locked onto mine, staring at me. And how it stopped. And how we both were there, motionless, yards away, looking at each other. And how it let out the most ungodly, inhuman screech I've ever heard. Like a pig being gutted. It squealed violently and the sound resounded through the bayou. And the chirping and croaking of crickets and frogs stopped. Everything stopped. And the rumbling and humming was all that could be heard afterwards. The rumbling and humming of a motor ahead. A vehicle speeding towards us, tires racing loudly. The thing in front of me hunched over and turned to see the headlights beaming our way. It hissed, getting down on all fours, only pausing for a moment to turn back towards me, gawking at me with its wide eyes, before crawling hastily into the swamp. The vehicle that scared the thing away was my roommate's car. He never saw it, whatever it was. And I never wanted to see it again. I moved as soon as I could. And I haven't been there since. Hey guys, it's Wolf. Just wanted to take a second to thank you guys for listening to the story this evening. I'm going to be trying to do more, about 2 a week if possible. If you guys have suggestions or comments on how I should sound better or what stories I should read, feel free to drop them in the comments below. All of my artwork is done by AC Mars, so you should definitely check out her Instagram page and give her a follow. Links in the description below. And yeah, if you guys like what you hear, please feel free to like and subscribe. I'm really trying to make this a big thing. I know 2 times a week ain't much, but it's still fun to get it done. And thanks again for tuning in, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.